Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Numbers. I'm Joshua Williams, and this is the podcast where we have real and raw conversations about what healthy ministry looks like. Today's episode is a tender one. If I were to call this anything, I would call it when your church feels more like a corporation. Now let me just say up front, this is not a church bashing session. I hope none of these episodes ever come across as a church bashing session. But I think it's important for us to share our stories and some of our experiences so that together we can walk this path of making our churches and ministries healthy, and also to find the healing that we need to do as well for those that have come out of those situations. In fact, with today's topic, it's one that I've heard echoed throughout church blogs and pastor groups on Facebook, and I've heard many stories of burnt out pastors who have experienced this pain when their church becomes more like a business than a ministry. Now, before we unpack what's broken in some of these ministry models, let me share with you just a little bit of my experience, because sadly, like some of you, I have experienced this culture where business trumps ministry. For me, I've served in multiple churches in multiple settings, and there have been some that have been huge, life-giving ministries to me, my family, and those that we ministered to. And then there's the others that are draining, and some deeply draining. There were some churches that I've worked for in the past that their mentality was 50 hours is the minimum to start. Now I realize in a church, yes, weekly, you're given all sorts of crazy hours as a staff member. But their approach was this. As a youth pastor, I was already going to student games. I was going to hangouts after. I was visiting their houses when they were sick. I was going to the hospitals and meeting up with the students and doing hangouts and events off campus, lots of times within their culture and their community, on top of doing all the normal stuff. But their point of view was, no. 50 hours is the bare minimum, and more than anything, we want to see you in your office seat. If you want to hang out and spend time with the students and do events and all that, that's great, but you do it on your own time. What we're paying you for is to have your butt in the seat, being visible within the office. Basically, they wanted me at my desk, and all the other things that really were related to the youth ministry I was working with was stuff that they expected me to do in my free time. Then there were like the invisible, unspoken, but spoken expectations that were put on me and my family, telling us who we could hang out with and who we couldn't. Not that they were saying you can't hang out with these people, but oftentimes if we were hanging out with people, the conversation would come up amongst the staff and leadership. Well, you're spending a whole lot of time with these people, but we really want you to spend time with these, the big givers. The ones that their family contributes a lot more to the ministry. Translation, they were big givers, and they wanted to make sure we had more face time with big givers. In fact, we were specifically told not to spend as much time with the people who couldn't contribute as much. I don't know about you, but for me and my wife, that crushed us. Because the ministry suddenly became not about connecting with people, it became about the bottom line and the bottom dollar. Maybe you've experienced something like that. Maybe you've experienced those moments like I have where you try to lead correctly within a ministry, and having student leaders, there are those moments of where you have to redirect the students. Maybe they're making bad choices as a leader. Maybe they're starting to blend some boundary lines and stuff. And so as the leader of the ministry, I would try my best to redirect those students. And I remember one conversation where I was pulled aside and told I could not redirect a specific student. Why? Because their parents were big givers. Their parents contributed a lot, and their family was seen as more important and thus had a bit more leeway than some of the other students. Leadership decisions weren't about discipleship and spiritual growth. They were about finances. There are actually conversations where me and my wife were told our kids have to be at every single birthday party they were invited to. Our kids need more FaceTime with other people in the church. My wife needed to make sure that she was correcting with the right ladies within the church. There were all these restrictions that were put on us. Not that we weren't making FaceTime, not that we weren't hanging out and all that, but it was always more and not good enough. And you need to be doing this. Why? Because that is what gives us the revenue that we need. Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever experienced pastors that were inaccessible? I realize every church has different sizes and maybe satellite campuses, and so it may be hard to meet up with pastors and your bosses on a regular occurrence, but there were some that even as a staff member, they were inaccessible. You can put in your 2-month reservation for a spot, and then maybe you can meet up with them. Or maybe you have the flip side, which is where those leaders are micromanagers. They manage every single aspect of your ministry. Every slide, every graphic, everything that you preach, every quotation, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's not that those things are necessarily bad, but it's when all of it becomes done under the purpose of protecting our brand. I remember one time that I was even told my outfit didn't match what the brand was trying to hit. I didn't have enough name brand stuff in my closet, and I needed to change that up in order to make sure that we were on brand. See, these things are signs that our church has become more like the culture, I believe at least, than what God designed our churches to be, where it's more about going viral than about pouring into people. There's a creeping culture and tactic that has leached its way into the church, where our churches mirror more of a business than a ministry. Maybe you've seen that, maybe you've felt that. It's when different things like productivity is greater and seen greater than actually pastoring. What are you producing? Not who are you connecting with and who are you pouring into, but what is being produced and how often are you producing it and how many hours are you spending pouring into it? As we've been talking about in this series, there are some that metrics trump maturity, where it's all about the numbers and not so much about who are you pouring into and what growth are you seeing come out of it. Where brand is better than brokenness, and everything is done to protect and grow that brand. And where presentation is more important than our physical presence. Everything is poured into the program and what is happening with the program and the lights, the visuals, the this, that, or the other, and all those things are good. But when that thing starts to trump our presence, then we know that we're heading in the wrong direction, where the church has become more like the business and the culture that it's in than the way that Christ designed it and the way that we should be seeking out to lead our church. If you've experienced some of those things, or maybe you know of more of those kind of comparisons, it can leave us feeling hurt and broken, saying, is this the best that the church has to offer? Is this the best way that we as a church can lead? And the truth is, it's not. But I've seen something better. And for that, we go back to the author and the foundation of our faith, Jesus. See, it's funny because when you look at the Bible, we see all these times that Jesus led his disciples. He led the other people. And the fact is that we pull little glimpses of those things to pour into a leadership program or how we tell other leaders to rise up or different ways we mentor people. But then when we lead a church, oftentimes Jesus' examples are not the ones that we go to the world's examples. But if we look at the founder of our faith, then we understand what real leadership looks like and the way that we should replicate that within our culture. One of the first things that Jesus did is he honored flexibility. He didn't weaponize it. I mean, if you look at Mark 1, there's the story of Peter's mother-in-law who gets sick and needs to be healed. And what does Jesus do? Jesus immediately goes. He interrupts his schedule to go be with her and heal her. There wasn't a huge crowd that followed them. There wasn't a big show. He was interrupting his important schedule to go and meet Peter's needs and his mother-in-law's needs. I mean, think about that in our culture. We have programs so lined up down to the very second. Any interruptions are rude and uncalled for and have no place within the church and within the ministry. And yet, look at what Jesus did. We need to get back to that point where flexibility and a flexibility amongst our staff and our church and our culture is honored and not weaponized. The second thing that Jesus often does that maybe we don't do enough of is that wins are shared and they're not siloed. You look at Luke 10, Jesus sends the disciples out, and when they come back, he wants to know what happened. Tell me what happened. Share with me what went on. And they share about the different things that they saw and they experienced and what happened when they prayed for people and all that kind of stuff. And there wasn't a comparison. There wasn't a, well, this wasn't good enough, or you only ministered to these many people, or Peter, he did a whole lot more than you, Thomas, and you need to get it together, or whatever. The wins weren't siloed. The wins weren't used against them. Instead, Jesus celebrated the wins that they went through. He doesn't say, well, that was all me, and you need to give me credit and everything. Instead, he just celebrated that they had the ability to step out and speak these things and experience these things and see God move through them. Do we allow a culture within our churches where wins are celebrated? Or do we use them against other people? Do they measure up to what this ministry did? To our expectations, to what this other church did? We need to get to the point where, like Jesus, we celebrate the wins. The third thing, failure is a learning moment. It's not a liability. Okay, Jesus has plenty of examples of his followers failing pretty hard. You have Peter, who denies him in his moment of need. You have James and John, the sons of thunder, who are asking for better seats and better experiences, and we want to have a higher priority, Jesus. You have Thomas, who doubts the very resurrection of Jesus. And what does he do? Does he sideline them, push them away? I'm done with you. I can't believe this. How do you not have any faith? How could you ask this? How could you leave me in my moment of issue when I needed you the most? No. What does Jesus do with Peter? He forgives and he restores. With James and John, he uses that as a moment to teach about servant leadership. With Thomas, he invites him, hey, feel the holes, believe. See, Jesus uses these opportunities of failure as a moment to disciple and grow his disciples even further in their walk with him. He doesn't sideline them, push them away, and say he's done with them. Instead, he uses it as a growth opportunity. How many times in a business culture are we afraid to take calculated risks for the ministry? How many times have we been afraid to fail, and because of that, we never step out? How many times have we stepped out and failed, and even in the slightest thing, it's used against us to sideline us, to push us away, to never give us an opportunity again? We need to start resembling and mirroring what Jesus did. Now, I realize there are different levels of failure. If I blow up the church van, probably shouldn't be driving the church van, and there might be other consequences. But in the same aspect, look at what Jesus did with his disciples. He used it as an opportunity for growth. Are we using failure as an opportunity for growth within our ministries and within our churches? The fourth thing. The vision is lived together, not pushed down from the top. I mean, I'm blown away with Jesus when he interacts with the crowd, and he is always the one leading into the crowd, and he's interacting with some of the outcasts of society. He's eating with the sinners, which was a no-no. He's touching the leopards. Can't do that. He's engaging with the kids, which everyone else just looked down on. He gave the woman an opportunity to speak when so many were silencing her. You look at how Jesus led, and he led not from demanding everything of his disciples and then just stepping back and making sure that it happened. Instead, he led from in front. It was him in the dirt. It was his feet on the ground. It was his sweat that was pouring down. Are we leading in that way? Are our leaders and our culture one where we are leading in front? Granted, it's youth ministry, but I've always told my students and my leaders, I will never ask them to do something that I am not willing to do first myself. And believe me, they've called me out on that a whole lot of times, and I've had to eat disgusting stuff for games that I was expecting them to. I've had to do the craziest challenges because we had that tied into the lesson. But the point is that they know I will never ask them to do something that I myself am not willing to do. I'm willing to lead from the front. Are we willing to lead from the front, or is it more of a dictatorship? Because that's not how Jesus led. See, Jesus didn't cast the vision. He embodied it. And one of the final things is that Jesus measured faithfulness, not just fruitfulness. You look at Matthew 25, and it's the story of those that were given talents, and some was given a lot, and he returned a lot. Some was given a good amount, and he returned a good amount, and some was given a little bit and didn't do anything with it. It's that middle one sometimes that we miss out on. Because what happened to the one that was given some and was faithful with that some that he was given? He was still honored. Jesus didn't turn around and say, whoa, why did you not return even more on that? Instead, the faithfulness of that servant was honored. Are we honoring just the fruits that are being produced within our ministries and within our churches? Or are we also honoring the faithfulness of those that are pouring out? Because there are some times where the fruit isn't evident right away. And because of that, we shut people down when they have been faithful. And sometimes it just takes time to see that fruit reproduce. That's how Jesus led. How are we willing to lead? Because those are some great examples of what Jesus did and how he led. And if we call ourselves a Christian, and if Jesus is the one that we built our foundation on, shouldn't we be mirroring the way that he led? So that's great that we talk about those things, but what are the actionable steps that we can use within our church and with our culture to change it, whether we're a staff member, whether we're a lead pastor, or maybe you're just a congregation member? What are the conversations and steps that we can take to begin to see a culture shift within our churches? For staff members, I would challenge you to start documenting wins that are not numerically based. Can I tell you what goes so much farther than just the story of this amount of numbers? Is a story of what God is doing in someone's life. Start documenting what God is doing through your ministry in the lives of others, because in the end, that is what others see more than just, we had 400 people attend. Here's a story of Bob, whose life was transformed through what Jesus did within him. That's how you begin to start changing the culture. What are some of the wins that you can document stories of how God is doing something in people's lives? As a staff member, I would also challenge you to find safe spaces to talk about these things that are outside of our church community. Sometimes it can be so hard being siloed within that community that we feel like we have no escape to even talk or vent or share our hurts and our feelings. It's important for you guys to find other outlets to be able to do that in a healthy way. Whether that's different communities outside of your church community, different groups that meet up. Maybe it's through therapy and counseling. Maybe it's through podcasts like this, shameless plug. But what are areas that we can find those safe places to begin to have those outlets where we can talk and vent and have these discussions that aren't just siloed within the church? Now for pastors, leads, check your metrics. Are we valuing the health of our ministry on just the metrics of our church? Are we looking at deeper metrics of what God is doing within people's lives, of people that are being discipled and growing in their walk, of evangelism that is happening to our community and the surrounding areas? What are the metrics that we're lining up health against within our churches? For you leads, I would also challenge you to create feedback loops where people that you trust can be honest and critique different things. And when I say find those people, I mean be open and honest with them and allow them that opportunity. Oftentimes, we can say we create these feedback loops, but then me, like anyone else, we can get defensive. If we don't agree with that, we're going to jump on it right away. And what you have is one person that's open and honest, and then they see the response, and everyone else just becomes yes men. It's important to find those people that you trust, that you can create those feedback loops through, to start hearing some of the things that we might not be seeing with our own eyes, but what God might be trying to reveal to us within our ministries and the culture that we are building. And then for the final thing for the leads out there is model the margins. What I mean by that is, what are you setting as the example in the way that you lead? You have a staff culture in a church that is looking to you. I've been at churches where the pastor is gone 6 months out of the year on vacation. But then to that same staff, they're hemming and hawing over a week. Is that the right model that we're trying to set? The right example we're trying to set for our team? Then there's the opposite side of those that push through. And believe me, when I get excited about stuff, I can push through and I need to be reminded to take a break. But there are some that they push through and then will brag about, I've never taken a vacation in the last 4 years. Is that the healthy margin that we're setting? And then is that the health that we want to replicate to our team? Are we modeling healthy margins? And if we're not, we need to start doing that within our teams. And for you congregation members, you're wondering, how do we change the culture? That's awesome for the staff, that's awesome for the leads, but what can I do at the church that I'm attending now? Here's a couple of quick things. One is change the questions that you're asking, or ask better questions. And I realize as I say that, it sounds very pointed. I'm not saying it that way, but what I mean is I would love it if a congregation member came up to me and instead of saying, how many are attending on Wednesday? How many are attending on a Sunday? If instead they said, hey, can you tell me a story of a student that God is just moving in? Something that God is doing, maybe a transformation that has happened with them. I would love to hear how the health and wellness of your ministry is going. What is God doing within them? Or coming back from an event and not hearing the first thing be, well, how many attended? That's higher or that's lower than it was before. But instead, what did God do through you, through your team, through that event you guys went on? Like, what was he saying? What was he doing? Because the truth is, when I hear that, I get pumped up as I share those stories. And I think it creates a sense of excitement and hype among those that ask the question. So what if we started asking better questions of our leaders and of our staff and of our ministries? What if we also start supporting health over the hype? We want our staffs to be healthy. We don't want it to be like the business world where everyone is just worked to rawness and that's it. But then in the same aspect, when a ministry or a congregation member asks the pastor to do something, asks the staff member to do something, and their plate is literally overflowing, and they say, I can't rate this moment, they're hurt. They're upset. They're mad. How dare they do this? What if instead of doing that, yes, I know it means we might have to pull more volunteers. Yes, I know it means it's going to be a little bit more work to make this event happen or whatever. But what if we honored the fact that our leaders were drawing good boundaries in time management instead of burning themselves out? And the last thing is start healthy conversations. And I know the minute we say healthy conversations, everyone's like, oh, gossip. Healthy conversations. That means going to the right people when we see things that may be red flags, that may be cultures that we don't want to set in our church, or we see our church culture going in a direction that we're like, this seems more like a business than a ministry. So go to the right people and have those healthy conversations. Sometimes we may find that we're wrong in those things that we're feeling. Sometimes it may be enough to share with those leaders that all of a sudden they realize, man, I'm in the heat of it and I didn't realize that. Let's start making those necessary changes. But here's the thing. It never happens if we're not having healthy conversations and we're not having them with the right people. Hear me. It's not a gossip fest. It's not about tearing down things. It's about going to the right people and opening those conversation pathways. Now It's great to talk about these actionable steps. And I love the idea of starting to build that culture, that healthy culture within our church that gets beyond the numbers. But then there are some of us that we've been part of those cultures. There are some of us that we have the bruises and the cuts and the brokenness deep inside that show everything that we've been through. And changing the culture isn't enough because we're living the pain of what we have experienced. I want you to have healing just as much as I have had to seek out healing for myself for the different areas that I have been wounded. Healing is kingdom business. So what can we do for those that have those wounds to find the healing that God has for us? The first thing I want you to realize is that maybe for some of us, we have done this lone wolf thing alone, and we feel like, well, this is just what every church is. I've experienced that before where I thought, is this what the ministry is? Can I tell you something? Even though this is becoming more and more common, it doesn't mean that it's kingdom. It doesn't mean that this is the way that it was meant to be, and it doesn't mean that it's the way that we need to continuously live in. So culture can change, but more importantly, you can find healing through Christ. But hear me when I say this. If you have experienced that hurt, you are not alone. And I don't say that in a way to say like, tough it out, but I mean, we can feel like we are the only ones that are experiencing it, and we can see everyone else posting about how great their churches are, how great their cultures are, and what's happening, and we feel like we are alone in it. You are not alone. There are people that have experienced that same hurt that you are going through. You're not crazy for going through it. You're not crazy for feeling those things. You're not crazy for having those wounds. But also realize, because you've experienced those hurts, it doesn't mean that you're weak. That's a lie that we tell ourselves so many times. Because I'm hurting, it means that I'm weak. It means that I'm not good enough. That is not the case. The truth is that it is okay for you to grieve. In fact, it's important, if you have gone through this, to be able to grieve and to process those things. Don't just keep on compiling everything on top of each other, because you will eventually blow up. But instead, it is okay to grieve and to say the things that have hurt you and the things that you have experienced. And most importantly, it's okay to grieve those things to God, to share those hurts with Him. It's important for you to be able to grieve those things. And it's also important for you to be able to process all of those things to start that healing process. To find that rest. To say, this wasn't right. Start that process by being able to be honest with yourself and with God about those things. But I would also challenge you, in order to find that healing, it's important for you to find a community, as I shared earlier, that might be outside of the church, or at least the church that you work for. Find an online community of those that maybe have the same experiences, the same hurts, but have found healing through it. Find those people that you know you can share all of those hurts with, and that aren't going to let it sit and fester, but instead are going to point you in the direction of finding healing and finding those voices that you can resound with and sound off with, and find the healing that God wants for you. Find those communities, whether it's in online groups, whether it's in a personal group of maybe other pastors or other staff members from other churches that you can share that with, or maybe it's even in counseling. It's important for you not to do this alone. I would also challenge you to saturate yourself in the scripture, because oftentimes when we're going through it, we feel that thing that I've echoed throughout this entire podcast, which is, am I the only one that's experienced? Is this what ministry is like? Because as I shared earlier, all those examples of Jesus' leadership, you only find that out when you go to the scriptures, when you soak in them, when you read them, when you apply them to your life. That's when you see what healthy leadership looks like, how you should replicate healthy leadership. And most importantly, you start to realize who you are in Christ. And sometimes that means that your foundation isn't on the ministry, but it's on Christ alone. But you can only do that when you're saturating yourself in the Word, spending time with Jesus. I want to close by reading a scripture that always stands out to me every time I read it, and I am going to be reading it from the Message Bible. But it says this in Matthew 11:28 through 30. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you will recover your life. I will show you how to take a real rest. I read that, and when I read that, there is a sense of peace and relief when I read those words that Jesus gives. For some of us, just the idea of him saying, I will give you rest. There's a burden that is lifting there. Why? Because you are desperate for that rest within him. But then he also says, you will recover your life. And there are some of us that the hurts and the wounds go so deep that we feel like we will never recover what is lost and we will never recover our life. And that is just a lie. But it's about going to Jesus, finding that relief, that peace, and that healing with him. But it also means that this process is not an overnight, one and done process. It takes time to heal. It takes time to build the culture. It takes time to follow out this ministry the way that God wants us to. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's a slow work, and that is okay. It's a holy work, and that is okay. So you don't have to rush the culture change. You don't have to rush your healing, but allow God to start you on those steps to see these things happen within our life. I hope that this episode had something that stood out to you, that you feel like you're not doing this alone, that maybe if you've seen those warning signs and feel like, man, is my ministry becoming more like a business than a church, that you realize that you're not alone in this, but more importantly, that change can happen, that the culture can shift. See, a healthy ministry doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts within our hearts. So if this resonated with you, if there was something that stood out, or maybe you have a story that you want to share, I would say comment. I would love to connect with you guys and hear your stories and hear what God is doing through you. Also, if something stood out, or maybe you feel like, hey, this is something that someone else needs to hear, share this. Like, comment, subscribe. But share it with someone that you know needs to hear these words. As for the next episode, we're going to dive into another deep, dark topic. I'm going to tell you about a season where I almost walked away from the ministry. Why? Because I was tired, I didn't have good boundaries, and I was pushing myself past the point of exhaustion of me, myself, and my family. Next week, we're talking about boundaries and burnouts. If you've ever felt like you're running on empty, then that is an episode that you definitely don't want to miss. So I look forward to seeing you guys and hearing from you guys. But keep it posted here. I'll see you next week as together we work to get beyond the numbers. Thanks. Ministry looks like. And I've seen it. I missed a whole section. The fourth thing. The vision is